rockets going from Libya to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. How much of a real threat is this? Or is this simply a bogeyman that's always alluded to for fear of what might be the unknown?
Well, the specter, as it is described by Muammar Gaddafi, of course, is nonsense. The idea that somehow al-Qaeda is leading the revolution in Libya, that's complete nonsense. The situation that Secretary Clinton is describing and that she is apparently concerned about is that in a situation of complete political chaos, if that were to arise in Libya, then you would have a situation where there was essentially ungoverned space. And in that ungoverned space, there are any number of different elements, groups who could find a safe haven and who would be able to operate with relative impunity in the way that relatively small but very violent groups are able to do in Somalia. So I think that's the scenario that Secretary Clinton is concerned about, but certainly we are a long way from that point.
Phil Rees, how real is this scenario?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I spoke to someone from the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group recently that had been banned in the United States as a foreign terrorist organization. And I think that Islamists and secularists now, at least in the short term, believe that their interests are shared and their long-term security is enhanced by collaborating together to ensure that democracy is founded and founded properly. I think for the United States, it's got to consider in the long run that you either have real democracy or you don't. And when you have this rebirth of an Arab identity, and let's look at Egypt. Every Egyptian, you can be Coptic, you don't have to be part of the Ikhwan there. Every Egyptian would want to change government policy to Israel. So what happens when that would happen? What that would occur? What will happen in Bahrain if democracy comes there and you have a Shiite majority, which you would have there, that might be leaning towards Iran and destabilizing nearby Saudi Arabia.
But
so how much democracy is America prepared to have?
Well, precisely, is there an indication that America is prepared to accept the central tenet of democracy, which is precisely allowing widespread representation of groups, political forces that represent a large segment of the population, whether one likes it or not?
Well, I think that's that's why the Muslim Brotherhood are walking on eggshells, both in Egypt and in Tunisia. They've made certain agreements regarding women's rights, religious freedoms, etc. So, they're actually trying to work within a system that the Americans must accept. But I think there will be issues, and you're already seeing in Britain headlines like oil prices will double because of the unrest in the Middle East. I mean, the reason the West is there is because of the West's interests, and that will collide with Arab interests at some point in the future. Now, this is not to do with terrorism, but of course, if you then prevent Arab expression, this very exciting rebirth that is happening, which is not anti-Western, it will become anti-Western again if the West's hand is seen to be meddling. And there are already indications of that. Look at the British having sent an SAS team and MI6 agents into Libya in this botched attempt. I mean, feeble as that was, it's a kind of indication that the West can't keep its fingers out of Middle Eastern politics.
Robert Grenier, is that a fair depiction of what's going on? That the U.S. will always butt into the affairs of other countries, even though it says that it may not be doing so? Phil Rees referred to the British forces landing in Libya and getting involved apparently in gunfire exchanges. But we also have now senior lawmakers in the U.S. talking about the need to arm some of the opposition rebel fighters. And of course, much talk in many different parts of the world about the need to impose a no-fly zone. Would that be counterproductive in such a nationalist country as Libya?
Well, I think that the United States and the West more generally really do need to walk a very fine line here. I think there's a great deal of positive sentiment toward those who are in open revolt against Gaddafi. And there was a sentiment on the part of some to try to be of assistance, and even those among the current rebels who are making open requests for assistance, depending on the form of that assistance, that they might change their tune very, very quickly. So, for instance, there were those who were saying that, as you mentioned, there ought to be the imposition of a no-fly zone so that Gaddafi can't use his air force against the rebels. However, were the West to do that, led by the United States, that would be very problematic, because the first stage in any such operation would be to suppress all anti-aircraft defenses. and that there could very well be collateral damage and casualties as a result. So I think that the West has to be very, very careful. I think that they have to operate with a very light hand. There may be certain types of humanitarian assistance that they could provide to rebel-held areas. But again, they have to be very, very careful both in terms of what they do and the way that they're perceived.
And some, of course, continue to argue that in the long term, al-Qaeda could benefit from these ongoing revolts or uprisings, revolutions in the making in the Arab world, as some regimes continue to cling on to power. Some, as Abu Khalid, a Jordanian fighter, seem quite certain that in the long term, al-Qaeda is going to emerge as a winner. He says, at the end of the day, how much change will there really be in Egypt and other countries? There will be many disappointed demonstrators, and that's when they will realize what the only alternative is. We're certain that this will all play into our hands. Kamal Helbawi, your thoughts on this? In the end, if there's a lot of disappointment, dashed hopes, will al-Qaeda then prevail?
I don't think that in a country like Egypt, al-Qaeda or violent groups will prevail, because the long history of the Muslim Brotherhood explaining Islam in a moderate way, in a wasati way, as comprehensive, international, and moderate as well, so, and divine. So, and they have a very deep root in the society now, in mosques and in cultural societies. So the culture of the Egyptian society have almost become moderate Islamic understanding, not violent and terrorist or extremist ideas like we used to have in the 80s and the 90s by the Jamaat Islami and by the Jihadi Islam. But in a country like Libya, where Gaddafi has stopped every aspect and every culture and every move and every movement, and he made Abu Salim massacre, where even Muslim Brotherhood who were moderate were, you see, included in the massacre as well. And I know some of the Libyan fighters who went to Afghanistan. There was a large number of them. Some of them returned back, and the Saif al-Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, had made a protocol or an agreement with them. I am sure these members of a violent group or whatever you call them will find the chance in the revolution against Gaddafi, and they will find good armaments in different stores that have been stolen, and they will continue because they have to revenge. So the tribal society in Libya is to a great extent different from the civil society in Egypt. If you go to Tunis as well, we will find that the return of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi